Excellency, could you...
We actually, together with European Union member states, we have 21 of the European Union member states have embassies in Addis. And like in many other countries around the world, we have launched something we call the Team Europe. And Team Europe is all the European Union member states and the delegations working together. And under this flag, under this banner, Team Europe, in Ethiopia we have together raised something like 490 million euros to assist in the fight against coronavirus in Ethiopia. So that's close to 20 billion Ethiopian birr. And I think that's a good example of what we can do when we work together. Then of course we do this very closely coordinating with the Ethiopian Ministry of Health, trying to understand what the Ethiopian priorities are, and then we adapt what we offer as assistance so that there is always an Ethiopian lead, because at the end of the day it will be the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian institutions who of course will know far better than we do what it is we should focus on when it comes to fighting the coronavirus here. We have also in a partnership with the German government together reached out to through IGAD and the African Union. And I was myself present at the airport a couple of months ago when we received several tons of medical equipment for Ethiopia that was going to be used to fight the coronavirus.
Regarding this fighting the coronavirus, and thanks to the scientists and researchers now, Pfizer and BioNTech developed vaccine for the coronavirus, and so this thing is good and a good news for the people. There is something called vaccine nationalism, and what would be the role of EU in bridging this gap? Because millions of Africans are waiting the others' assistance in this regard.
Yeah, I think it's important that you raise the issue of so-called vaccine nationalism. Here I think if you look at what the European Union is doing right now in Europe among the member states, it's a good way of showing how we can overcome this so-called vaccine nationalism. That this is, I mean, the virus is global, it's a global challenge. We don't really have a choice except to cooperate. And I mean, the way to overcome the virus will have to be through cooperation, because successes in one country will fail if other countries are not successful. So it's really a joint fight.
How do you assess the bold reform underway in Ethiopia and the recent law enforcement attacks in the northern parts of Ethiopia?
Well, we, ever since 2018, with the launch of the very ambitious reforms, reforms in terms of democratization, human rights, releasing political prisoners, releasing journalists, but also promises of launching economic reforms. And as you know, there are many more aspects to the reform agenda. And the European Union was very early out to show that we firmly supported this reform agenda that was launched by Prime Minister Dr. Abiy Ahmed and his government. And we do hope that the advances, the progress that has taken place in Ethiopia since 2018 will be safeguarded, so that there is not a rollback of what has been achieved, and that the reform process will remain firmly on track. And when it comes to the situation in northern Ethiopia. I'm sure you will have seen that it's extremely important for us that there will be full humanitarian access to all areas. So we hope that there will be more progress on this front, on the issue of humanitarian access. And then, as you will know, this is not specific to Europe. It's the same in any, whether it's a conflict zone somewhere in the world, whether it's a country that has been ravaged by a natural disaster, there are certain principles that all countries have agreed on. I think it's not for me to comment on measures taken by the Ethiopian government as such. Where we do have views is, for example, on the humanitarian situation, that which is crucial to us, and I think that virtually all Ethiopians I engage with, that I talk with, they also agree that how this process unfolds will also be very important for the day when the guns grow completely silent and the process of reconstruction starts, the process of reconciliation starts. So I think we all now have to make an effort to lay the foundations for that day. The government is doing efforts when it comes to restoring communication, for example, but communication is still limited. And that I think is concerning, because if communication is limited, you come back to the issue of how do you then ascertain, how do you then evaluate the needs on the ground in a proper way. And I think both the European Union and other parts of the international community, also the UN agencies, have shown through what they have said, they have shown through their actions that we are all engaged in doing the best to make sure that the humanitarian supplies reach the people in need. And that will also be, I think, it's about laying the foundation for a sustainable peace, for a sustainable recovery and reconciliation process.
Ethiopia is working on keeping the peace of Horn Africa and bringing the countries together in terms of economic and diplomatic ties. And what is your take on that?
Well, when it comes to these efforts, let me first say that for us, our vision of Ethiopia in the Horn of Africa would be as an anchor of stability for the entire region. And as you know, the European Union is basically a peace project, because after two devastating world wars in Europe, the vision of the European Union was that economic and political integration in Europe between countries who had been fighting one another for hundreds of years was a way of securing peace and peaceful cooperation. So that is, of course, also what we would like to support in the Horn of Africa. Therefore, an important part of the programs of the European Union in Ethiopia when it comes to development cooperation has been efforts to facilitate regional integration. And it can be, just to give us an example, it can be very basic things like making sure that a border crossing, the customs procedures work smoother, that it becomes easier for businessmen, for traders on different sides of the borders to go to the other country, to do their business, to sell their goods, to sell their services. Because the more closely economically integrated two countries are, the less likely it is, that the peace between the countries will eventually be threatened. This was one of the main ideas behind European integration. And so we're hopeful that we could see a similar development in Ethiopia. And that's also why we consider it important that the ongoing challenges in the north of the country are not internationalized, are not regionalized, because then we come back because if that were to happen, then it goes completely against this vision that we have of a prosperous, democratic Ethiopia where all Ethiopians enjoy basic human rights, live in prosperity. That vision of Ethiopia is a vision of an Ethiopia that takes its rightful place in the Horn of Africa, and as I said, can play the role of an anchor of stability for peace and security. And I think that's also what the neighbors of Ethiopia are hoping for. That is the Ethiopia they would like to see.
Regarding the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam, EU is in favor of win-win approach, while some countries and organizations are promoting one and escalate the dispute. And what message do you want to convey to these countries and organizations as well?
Well, yeah, I think our stand is quite clear. We think that this is a project that could ultimately play a very important role in bringing countries together. We think it's a project that could be developed in such a way that all countries concerned, but also other countries in the region could stand to benefit of the existence of the dam when it comes to economic development, when it comes to regional peace and stability. So that's also a message that we have been very clear on from the start. Then, as you know, just as Ethiopia is a very important partner for the European Union, so is also Egypt, and so is also Sudan. So we hope, to the extent that it's welcomed by the involved countries, to play a role as an honest broker, and to encourage the parties to keep talking with one another. And as always, it's important, if you are in Addis, to look at the situation with the eyes of an Egyptian or a Sudanese, and it's similarly very important if you are in Cairo to try to understand the Ethiopian viewpoint, and always try to look at the negotiations with the eyes of the other.
What kinds of programs and mechanisms does your organization has to help the developing countries?
Well, as you know, the European Union is the biggest contributor globally to international cooperation funds, and I think Ethiopia, as I said, is a good example because it's our single most important partner in Africa. So in the period 2014 to 2020, the European Union invested almost 1.2 billion euros in Ethiopia. It's development cooperation, going, for example, to develop, to support the Ethiopian agriculture sector gain more market shares in Europe or other countries. It could be about supporting the work of Minister Dr. Lia Tadesse, the Minister of Health. It's about supporting the development of infrastructure in Ethiopia. Another part of what we do has also been what we call the Trust Fund for Africa, which is related to the migration crisis. Then, as you know, the European Union is an important humanitarian actor. So in Ethiopia, we support those Ethiopians who have become refugees in their own country or are internally displaced. So it's a broad partnership. And of course, like you hinted at yourself, we work closely with European companies and try to help them navigate in Ethiopia. We try to identify opportunities for these companies and also to assist them if there are occasional obstacles for an investor. So we work very closely not just with the Ministry of Finance, but also with our friends in the Ethiopian Investment Commission.
Ethiopia is among the countries allowed to enter the EU's territory. And what was the criteria then?
I think it's also an example of a win-win approach. I mean, we have an interest in qualified Ethiopians being able to study or to work in Europe, and similarly we know how welcome European investors or other Europeans are in Ethiopia. So I think it's always important in any good partnership, in any good relationship, that it's a relationship of equals, that it is a relationship characterized by partnership. So what you mentioned there, I think is a good example of that.
The measurement of a strong nation is based on how strong their institutions are, and now currently Ethiopia is working on strengthening institutions. And what would be the role of EU in terms of experience sharing and intellectual assistance?
Yeah, I think one good example is the work we're doing again in the framework of our cooperation. We work with what we call governance issues. That can be a lot of things. And just to take one example out of many is the work we do with the legal institutions in Ethiopia to assist and support reforms of the legal system, of the courts and so on. So I've had the pleasure myself on engaging repeatedly with Chief Justice Measa, for example. We have also, if you look at efforts that we've been supporting on the ground, is this is a tiny example, but just to make it more concrete, it has been to support what we call legal assistance. And what that means is that Ethiopians who have very limited resources get the possibility, for example, to pursue a case before a court of law. And I've talked myself with women who have been completely, extremely poor, but through this type of support, they have been able to pursue cases in courts, and it could be to an ex-husband who didn't want to pay them alimony. But as you know, there are also quite a few cases in Ethiopia where there are issues or confrontations in a family about land rights, title deeds and so on. And then of course it's very sad if you have someone who is very, very poor and lacks the resources on her own or on his own to get in touch with a lawyer, to pay a lawyer. So I'm very proud that we have been able to assist some of those Ethiopians through our support, getting their day in court and successfully pursuing these cases.
What are the major areas of focus for the EU to work on with Ethiopian government?
Well, I mean, what we to mention some of them mentioned agriculture, which also includes efforts at nutrition. We have huge investments in infrastructure, which means working very closely with the Ministry of Transport. Then, of course, we work also with the Ministry of Finance. We work with ARRA and you know, the NDRMC, the National Disaster Risk Management Commission, when it comes to our humanitarian assistance. So it's we do a lot. We're very happy that we're able to be active in different sectors and different parts of Ethiopia. But what is crucial to me is that our starting point is always what the Ethiopian priorities are, what the priorities of the Ethiopian government are, what the priorities of the regional governments of Ethiopia are. So this is about listening to what the Ethiopian government and people want, and then seeing if when there are areas that we can support. And I think that's the way it should be like. This is not about us coming with ideas and about what should happen in Ethiopia. This is about us coming to Ethiopia, listening to the Ethiopians, and then seeing what we can do together.
Sixth general election is ahead in Ethiopia. What would be the role of EU pre-election and the post-elections stage?
Well, I mean, first of all we have to evaluate the new timetable that has been presented by the electoral board. Up until now, we have been very supportive of the work, not least of the electoral board, and we have considerable funds set aside to help with organizing free and fair and democratic elections. So we're of course welcoming that a calendar has been presented, and now we have to sit down and look very closely at it, the meaning, the scope of the elections, and so on, together with our partners, not least in the electoral board.
Excellency, you have made a vivid explanations, and if you have something to add, you are welcome.
No, just to say Galatoma to you and to your viewers, and thank you so much for showing interest in what the European Union, but also the European member states are doing in Ethiopia, together with the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian people.
I see. Much thanks indeed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a million.
Thank you. This is all we have for today. I hope you have enjoyed the program. Thank you.